After Mountbatten's visit, we had the Christmas rain. It was rather wet. The creek rose. It stopped all troop movements. When the rains dried up and the army began withdrawing, slowly but surely, we wondered what was going on. It appears the Japanese had started to get aggressive and had crossed the Chinwin River and stopped at the U River to consolidate. They were setting up patrols across the river and finding out what our strength was. They crossed the U River in strength and proceeded north with the British forces fighting a withdrawal. It was a rather confusing time for us because Wingate was going into Burma with gliders, and we were at Tamu and we had to light beehives down each side of the runway. They were coke or something, and we poured kerosene on them to guide the gliders in case they had to land. And that's what we did. Right up and down, run and keep them burning. We did that for about 4 days. Then Arakan said, "Bring all the beehives in and we'll send them back." It appears that they had got all the gliders over. At 3 AM, Arakan said, "Get some sleep because you've been awake for 2.5 days. Stand to was 6 AM. Arakan came to me and woke me by poking me with his finger. He said, "Didn't those 25-pounders wake you up?" I said, "No." I looked and there were 6 25-pounders put on the edge of the airfield and they were all being fired. The Japanese were advancing slowly towards us and the army made a strategic withdrawal. My father laughs at this word. We had an old ferry battle plane. It was used to bring mail and dispatches to the army. This day it landed, but it didn't take off. The magneto was buggered. So we pushed it back into the scrub and put a drum of petrol under the wing, as we didn't want the Japanese to get it. At camp, we had a fixed Bren gun to aim at the petrol drum and with fixed lines. It was my job. We loaded it with incendiaries and 303 armour-piercing piercing bullets. The following night, it appears the Japanese found the southern end of the airfield, and they fired shots up the airstrip, and like bloody fools, we fired back down the airstrip. An army officer told us not to fire anymore. We want them to come this way, and it appears they did, because that night they sneaked up on the far side of the airfield and passed right by us, over the creek, and ran into a battalion of Panthers from Afghanistan. And there was an exchange of small arms fire for about half an hour. Then everything went quiet. Next morning, a jeep came into the camp and brought a magneto. We fixed it to the plane and dragged it to the end of the runway, and it took off. We had no way of moving the 40-gallon drum, so we just kicked it over so the Japs couldn't get it. The next day, Arakan said an army officer asked how much ammo we have. We have 8 boxes of 100 rounds for 303s. We gave 4 boxes away and all the spare grenades. We stayed there that night, but it was very quiet. Next day, Arakan said, "We're packing up here and going across the road." All the tents were taken down, put on the truck, and sent back to the unit. We were left with 30 rounds of ammunition and what we stood in. We went across the road and manned a slit trench. There was a bunker at the end. In the bunker, there was a Gurkha, an officer from the Gurkha regiment. He said, "Man the trench tonight, and tomorrow a battalion of Gurkhas was coming down." We stayed in the trench all night and got a bit of sleep. There was sporadic fire all night in front of us, and the next morning an army medical officer lad asked us could we have a look at some lads in the tank. That night some Japs had dropped grenades in the tank. Paddy Smith, Corporal Irish, had to go with a few lads to patch him up. Then the Gurkhas came, and their commander told us to stand up, look straight ahead, then turn right and march out. He said, "Don't let me down." He needed to show discipline to his men. We did as we were told. As he walked away, my dad realised that they weren't ever going to come back. Then we marched down the road to our own trucks. Arakan told me to get the jeep with him and his driver, but I didn't get in at first. He talked to some army officers, come back and said, "Let's go back to Palel." On the way back, we saw a 20mm Hispano cannon, depressed, ready to fire ground to ground, dug into the side of a hill. I thought at the time we must have been short of artillery. All the lads were there waiting for us. They thought we were lost or something. When we got back to camp, they started the routine there. There were 2 squadrons just below us on the airstrip. When they built the airstrip, they bulldozed it. There were cuttings in the dirt, and that's where we put the aircraft. We used to do patrols around it at night. Some Gurkhas brought an anti-aircraft gun, a 20mm Hispano cannon, and put it on top of a mound. I don't know how they got it up there, but they did. The Gurkhas asked us to stop patrolling the area as they were guarding the area and it would save confusion. After we stopped, a Japanese patrol with what appeared to be Indian prisoners of war came in and placed bombs in the air chutes of the aircraft. When challenged by the Gurkhas, they got the Indians to answer in their own language, and the Japs walked around and put the bombs in the 6 aircraft. The aircraft set on fire and burnt down. The Indians were captured as they were left there. That's how we found out. The Japanese started shelling, trying to hit the airstrip, but it appears they had trouble with overshooting. What they did was they got elephants to carry a 5.5 up the hill, and it was in a bunker. Way up a hill by elephants, covered well with big trees. We tried to knock it out with the 25-pounders. Even the 390 anti-aircraft shells exploded over it, did nothing. So they decided to plan to use aircraft. The Gurkhas knew where the bunkers were, but they couldn't get near it. So we used walkie-talkies. Right, this is the idea of walkie-talkie, and there's 2 of them. They're pretty big. The 4 of us and the pilot carried them up the mountain, and a squad of Gurkhas with us. We got on the hill about 1,000 yards from the bunker on a different hill, and they showed the pilot. The 2 Hurricanes came over, and the pilot with us told them where to drop the bomb. They did it and destroyed it, and that was the end of the menace. One evening, just before dark, the CO's Batman was turning down his bed for the night. The Hispano cannon on a Spitfire started firing and killed him. I don't know what really happened, but it appeared the pilot left the gun cocked, and when the plane cooled down, the hydraulics fired the gun. Once it started, the compression held it on. That's how it was explained to me. One of the sergeants was screaming and kicking and yelling. We held him down and got the medic to sedate him. He had cerebral malaria. A guy in my tent, a 2-man tent, was covered in spots. He had amoebic dysentery. They took him away in an aircraft. Never saw him again. It didn't look good, as if there was any possibility of getting better if you stayed in the valley. Every day there was confusion. Firing over here, firing over there. You could tell there'd been a skirmish when the ambulances went by. After that, instead of direct confrontation, the Japs decided to go around us. They went back across the U River and back up to Kohima. Kohima was a hospital depot and then ended up there. They started to fight both ways. It was relatively quiet where we were. That's a hand sketch my dad did of the area. Then the Japs went to Kohima. Sir William Slim, a general, flew the 5th Indian Division into Imphal, and the 2nd English Division came down from Dinapore and fought their way down. They lost 2/3 of their division. Eventually they began to overtake the Japanese and they began to retreat. During this episode, the monsoon started early, about June. That's what beat them, I think. They had little medical facilities. They had no aircraft either. We only saw 1 bombing raid at Imphal. When they started to retreat, the 20th Brigade went over the mountain and took 20 of our lads with them with radios for contact of their air force support. And they went, and Hurricane came back and said, "We're going back to Tamu tomorrow." In the meantime, we got reinforcements, as we'd lost a few lads with malaria, dysentery and such. Hurricane organised the new lads, 20 of them, and they were asking questions. Where are we going? What are we doing? I think this irritated my dad a lot. We got the tents organised. Hurricane said, "We're going into Tamu with the 11th East African Division engineers. All big black kids, Zulus. Their division was already there." We got to Tamu, slashed the growth, pitched the tents. The monsoons were almost finished there, but there was a lot of runoff. It was a hard time getting there. We got about 200 yards from Honey Creek near the border, and the Africans stopped us. There were mine detectors. and a Yank came past in the jeep. He had no time to stop, and he ran into a landmine. They had to walk back, and no one would help them. They were trying to organise the L5 ambulance aircraft. We got to the creek, and the Africans felled a big tree, and it fell across the creek. The creek was swollen. Paddy Smiles, the medic, was with us. The Africans went across the trunk. One lad fell off and was swept into the concertinaed barbed wire. He was scratched on his chest, his back, even the soles of his feet. Paddy Smiles says, "I only have one thing for this." He cleaned him up and poured iodine all over his open wounds. I watched his eyes and he never flinched. Tough bugger he was. We went straight back to our camp. The Japanese never touched it. They were afraid of booby traps. We just cut down the vegetation that had grown. In the hedges on the side of the roads were some dead Japanese soldiers. Some were already green, only maybe 12 hours. Once you smell a dead body, you never forget it. There were hundreds of them. The engineers buried them. The Yanks flew in with 2 DCs, again unloaded ice cream and Coca-Cola machines. Then they took a bulldozer and a calf grader. They made a dispersal strip for the aircraft L5s. Long wing, single engine monoplanes. Carry one in a stretcher and 2 standing up. We settled into the camp. It had been about 2 days when 30 Tamil, little blackfellas, came from the Madras area, and Arakan said, "Do you think you can get these lads to cut down the grass for the L5s? They all had their matics, and I had to show them how to do it. I set them in a line and set them forward. In about 3 days they had it all cut down, but the biggest problem with these people was the rations. The army gave me a goat and rice. They killed it and cooked it. They had all the pots and pans with them. They disappeared. I don't know what happened to them. No one told me. I was too busy looking after myself." Arakan decided to go down the U River. I'd never seen down there. He said, "You better come with us." He took all the new fellas. Then they started at me. "What can I expect? Where are the Japs?" I said, "You know as much as I do." We set off. So quickly there's Tamu, the U River and Chinwin. That's a view to see. There's a lot more rivers if you can see it. Monsoon had stopped, but there's still a lot of runoff. Your feet were always wet. In about 1.5 hours walk, we eventually got there. There was a beach sort of thing, and Arakan stopped in the scrub. Arakan said, "I want you all to disperse." They all crept out, but there was no one there. There were a few hammocks. There was an Indian army officer in one with a mosquito net. He was breathing. I crept up, and he was breathing, but he appeared to be asleep. He had a swastika on the top side of his lower forearm. Nothing else was in the other hammocks. Arakan stayed in the bushes, the crafty bugger. I told him, and he said, "The army can worry about it. There may have been a grenade under him." I said, "I never thought about that, but the swastika always intrigued me." His hands were together on his stomach, and the tattoo was about 1 inch above his wrist. Arakan told me the army officers, he told them when they got back. I never saw the army officers. I don't know how he contacted them. Arakan told me the swastika was a religious sect. The army must have told him that.